Now, in marketing, you might have discussed about consumer behavior. What do we mean by consumer behavior? Why is that we'll have to understand this particular concept, and how does it makes a difference in the manufacturer or the producer understanding his market and his consumer, and how does it has an effect on everything that the marketers does. Now the question arises whether understanding consumer behavior, particularly with regard to services, whether it is important or not. So, to the foundation of this, we can consider that with the product, when there is least amount of human involvement between the consumer and the producer, if consumers' behavior would have huge effect in terms of the way it is being produced, in terms of the way it is being marketed, then definitely we can understand how important the behavior of the consumer would be when it comes to services where normally it is an intangible uh, thing where lot of human interactions are involved. So, having said this, let us begin with this particular chapter. So, now, uh, if we go through your syllabus in particular, the first thing that they have asked is that you'll have to know what is search experience and the credence property. Sorry, search is the first element, experience is the second element, and the credence is the third element. What are these three attributes of services in particular? So if we directly move towards the marketing perspective, from a marketing perspective, products and services, both, it can be separated into three useful classes. That is what we call as search products, or when it comes to services, we can call them as search services. Then comes the experience products or the experienced services, and finally, we speak about the credence or products or credence services. There has been a mistake here. This is not SCR, it had to be SEC, property of services. So, why does it becomes important? Now, when we try to answer this particular question, we'll be able to know why we have to know the search experience and credence property of services. So, knowing whether buyers, conduct consideration, whether they consider something incomplete or partial or minimum information about the qualities of goods that they want to buy or they want to take us experience of, is the essential starting point for customer experience strategy that any organization does. Now, when an organization does this, This method always puts customer purchase is on a continuum of how easy or how hard it is for buyers to evaluate the qualities of the potential purchases that they make. So in any marketer's you know experience, uh, this particular element, it has been a durable and enlightening way to understand how these buyers, they engage in the purchasing, they select the products or services, and how do they recommend sources of goods and services to other. Now, when you try to understand this, you will know especially why you'll have to understand the search experience and credence, because it recognizes that the trust that is required to overcome a buyer's own reservations, all this is linked to the kind of purchases they consider. They enable experienced strategists and marketers to recognize these dynamics, in enabling uh, all those who are into this field to anticipate the currents they'll need to, accommodate in their work that they'll have to do. Now, when you understand this, you will know which type of good organ or a service an organization offers can help those companies to better engage buyers in consideration, or to create experiences that shifts offerings from one category to that of another. So first one, we'll see search services. Now remember one thing, services, definitely we are considering it as a different part here, but then whenever we'll have to speak about service, it is always comparison with the goods. So along with the way we always speak about the goods. So such products or such services, you know, all such things, they have attributes which customers can readily evaluate before they make the purchase. Maybe such as a hotel room price, or the schedule of the airline, or the timings of the television programs, and maybe also the quality of home entertainment system. All this, it can be evaluated before a purchase is made. So well informed buyers, they shall be aware of all the different substitutes that they can have, and all the different substitutes that exist. So this type of products, and therefore they are likely to be more price sensitive than other buyers. So unless there exists some brand reputation or some kind of customer loyalty, so this sensitivity that is there, it includes sellers to copy the most popular features and benefit of these types of services. So price sensitive is high with respect to products which have many substitutes. And since most buyers, they are aware of their alternatives, prices shall always be held within a competitive band. So as we said, if we have to tell it in terms of goods, these are such commodities. It can be currency bills, or maybe petrol, diesel, or a heart machine. So when a buyer, he shops for any kinds of such goods or services, It simply is that they have a clear perception of what they want and a high degree of certainty that it will be useful in a predictable way. So, as these commodities or services, what they are, know as soon as they find them. That is to tell, if they go to drugstores, they provide highly uniform drugs. Now, bank provides highly uniform money. So, or even, maybe a can of any juice at one grocery store is the same as that of the ones in the other. Maybe we can take Pepsi or Coca-Cola. So, groceries, banks, pharmacists, they are at their root provide of such goods. So naturally, businesses uh, which distribute commodity products, they'll attempt to differentiate themselves through experience, which add value to the commodities, or uh, that is to tell, if at all you go to a petrol bunk. Now, the clean restrooms, they do not make the petrol more valuable, but they may make a visit to the petrol bunk better. So, personable bankers, they may not make the money more valuable, but it makes getting it less taxing. So, a grocery store, which always keeps its products clean, it can make them more, appetizing. So now you are able to understand what this search goods are. So if you can see over the slide, it speaks about the continuum along the x-axis. You have high in search attribute. Those services which are high in experience attributes, and those products and services which are high in credence attributes. Now at the left hand of the continuum you have the element which are easy to evaluate, and in the right hand side of the continuum you have all those elements which are difficult to evaluate. So as you move towards uh, the right hand side of the continuum from the left hand side, you start moving from goods towards services. So now speaking about this such product or services, here comes the question, when will that people pay extra for the experience that they get? Is it that they would like to pay more for the better experience they want to have, or is it that it is always the same? Or to tell this from the point of view of marketer or economist, it is to tell when might improving customer experience make buyers less price sensitive. So what is price sensitive? Price sensitive is something where a little bit difference in the price would change the demand of the product or services drastically. So it here they are trying to tell that a customer's experience will always be made better. Sorry, they're trying to tell if it will customer experience make them less price sensitive. So when the price of search goods it is highly visible, then buyers are the most price sensitive. So consider how prominently these petrol prices are displayed on giant boards. So a price difference of a paisa or two, or 10 paisa or 20 paisa or a rupee or two per liter is frequently enough to get mm, these drivers to go out of their way when getting their petrol or diesel. So this type of behavior is less likely when people are shopping for all such commodities or service which aren't as directly linked to the price. So such as maybe a prescription of medicine where it might be rare to know So the next thing we can speak of is the experience goods or services. So you can tell it as goods, you can tell it as products. Okay, here we are mainly concentrating on the experience element of the services that we have. So this experience product or services, they can be evaluated only once after the purchase has been made. So if we have to tell in terms of services along with the products maybe such as dinner in a new restaurant or a concert or the theater performance that we see or a new movie or the hairstyling that we get. So not until the entire experience has been completed or purchased, we will not know what is that we are actually feeling. So the customer, they will be unable to pass judgment on the value until after the customer has experienced these services in total. So all these types of products or services, they tend to be more differentiated than that of the search products or services that we spoke. And here the buyers, they tend to be very less price sensitive. That is, they will not consider price up until the point it extremely becomes differentiated. And especially they are price sensitive, less price sensitive if it is their first purchase of the said product. But then since they will form an opinion after the experience, if at all such a experience service or goods, if it is not favorable, then no amount of differentiation will be able to bring them back to the organization. So product brand and reputation, they normally play a very important role in experience goods. So due to consistency of quality and loyalty, uh, especially. So when customers travel, so does brand reputation will follow. Maybe as with that of aeroplane services or airline services, what we can call, or the hotels, restaurants, or the rental cars, and all such things. So, experience goods are especially those where price, quality, or some other attributes of these services, they remain unknown until they are actually purchased. So when visiting maybe a new restaurant or maybe even in buying a bottle of new wine, you know, consumers, they show a willingness to take a risk on how satisfying the product might be. So compare that with purchasing petrol, where quality of the product is expected to be satisfying regardless of which petrol bunk you buy it from. So, but then even with experience goods, once a person has consumed the food or maybe the wine example that we took, they can readily evaluate their satisfaction with it. So the knowledge of prior customer satisfaction is highly influential to those considering the same choice. So uh, this dynamic nature that exists, it makes other buyers' reviews especially influential in the purchase of experience goods. So here what you can see over the slide is the four realms of an experience. Now this is extra information that has been put up. If you are interested in knowing, you can always go through some of the published sources for this. Now, this speaks about the realms of experience where it has been divided on the basis of maybe entertainment, education, escapist, and aesthetic. And you have absorption, emotion, passive participation, and active participation. That is to tell, the realms that the experience element that would be there with the service. So now we might get the question, is work a search or a experience goods? So this is to tell, access to information, it can change with category a good fall into. So this can be seen in labor pricing. The practice of employers keeping salary information confidential can be seen by a way of preventing, the kind of comparison between opportunities that would turn job opportunities into search goods. So the formalization of function and reward, uh, which are brought by union contracts, they would serve as a counter force to this by making these jobs more predictable and thus more like search goods. So, from this point of view, union with standardization and work rules commoditize jobs to the benefit of the applicants, maybe just as more transparent work and pay histories would commoditize all these kinds of applicants. So then we have credence goods or services. So this credence products or services, they will have all the attributes buyers cannot confidently evaluate even after one or more purchases. And that's why buyers tend to rely on the reputation of maybe brand name or testimonials, from they know or respect, or from service quality and also the price. So credence products, these credence products and services, it includes healthcare, legal services, accounting and advertising services, consulting services, and also information technology services. To go more specifically, it might include, pension, financial and funeral service, and maybe even pet food. That is, pet food we can include because since people always have to infer if the pet likes it or not. So credit services are more likely than other types to be customized. So making them difficult to compare to other offerings because there are fewer substitutes to a customized service and there is more risk in purchasing these types of services. So price sensitivity tends to be relatively low. That is, the majority of customers purchasing Credence services are relatively price sensitive compared to search or Credence goods. So this Credence goods may be the most interesting to marketers because even after their purchase and use, customers may still be unable to assess their quality. So this is often the case with expert services or high end services like that of maybe the service of the surgeon, the mechanics, the lawyers or the management consultants, and even that of a prestigious university. So most of this professional list they come under this credence goods, and it is always hard to evaluate competitors also here. So we might have this question, but isn't it that customers are the ones who know everything at the best because they are the ones who would be going through, all kinds of services or products. But then can always be said from the viewpoint of marketers that yes, customers they might know best, but often they'll not the best when it comes to the credence goods. So, in areas such as medicine and law, the clients of even the best practitioners often don't get the outcomes that they might want to seek. But this may have more to do with their own circumstances than that of the skill of experts who is helping them. So conversely, clients may experience superior outcomes that have nothing to do with expert services. So patients sometimes make recoveries where none was expected. So unless customers frequently purchase such services and are experts themselves, they may be responding more to the result they obtained rather than the services which have facilitated all such experiences. So the next question is the next thing that we can discuss here is the fact that finding the best expert is always hard because since customer opinions are less useful in respect to that of credence codes that we are speaking, there is a tendency to turn towards data to create objective scoreboards. So the attempt to do this both in law and medicine are endless. But whatsoever, performance data are often confounded by human selection. As people with the most difficult cases may seek out highly accomplished practitioners, so making comparison to their peers will always be uneven. Now, if it is fine to compare it with the rest of the elements that we normally do with other kinds of goods or products, then what is that or how is that we can evaluate this or how is that we are able to understand this credence goods? There comes the question that prestige is the currency of credence goods. Now, One thing that we understood is that a true success metric for this credence goods, that is absent here. That is, we cannot come up with one scale where we can speak about, this is the best credence good or whether this is the best credence services. So, the success trappings here, maybe such as high fees or architecture with, marble columns and professional endorsement, they stand into, influence this part. For example, consider higher education, which has previously been classical credence school. Now, there might be a prestigious university. It might be able to get for itself the brightest applications, and not years later, how bright and successful they remain. But then, even after doing all these things, it is difficult to know if their advantage is an effect of association with a prestigious brand or being in a high functioning cohort, or that, whether their academic training created this difference. So, that is the main problem with this credit services. So, this prestige and rankings by expert judges about credence goods or services, they play a similar role to customer review of, experience goods. Then comes credence goods always call for professional ethics. That is to tell, in many cases, consumers of credence goods, they may be unable to evaluate to what extent they even need these goods or services at all. So buyers of credence goods, they often rely on the expert opinions to both access their needs and also to fix, the situation that they have diagnosed. So we can take out the opinion of, credence goods and fraudulent expert economist Wendell Emmons words. He tells that brake shoes changed prematurely work just as if the shoes replaced had been faulty. I'll repeat his words once again. He tells brake shoes changed prematurely work just as if the shoes replaced had been faulty. So in the same way, a patient whose, appendix was removed unnecessarily has the same prospect of health as one who needed and received that procedure. So in such cases, buyers may be unable to determine the, the extent of urgency of own need, or, later gauge how expert service helped them. So now, in answering to this particular challenge, experts of all kinds, they are finding ways to use, the digital technology so that they are able to improve these kind of experience. Now in medicines, right from orthopedics to maybe gastroenterology, and, in dentistry, digital imaging and modeling, they are helping doctors to record what they are treating and also to know its effects. So, if we compare the previous generation, patients would have taken the word of these experts, that something needed to be fixed. But now they can see the dimension of their need and the benefits of care. So this asymmetry of information which comes with credence goods, it creates a need for practitioners to adhere to a policy ethical perspectives to prevent the exploitation of such expert advantage. So professional license or union certification and also standing in learned association, all these are irrevocable signs of good conduct used by these communities to protect their specialist reputation. So now after knowing all these things, when we know about credence goods, here comes this that with understanding so much about customer, let the customer strategy fun begin. So now that you have this way of looking at the buyer relationship that you had never known that there was something called a search experience and credence. Now how will you use it? That is to tell the next time you see maybe a ranking shield on a website, you might be more likely to reflect on how much certainty it really gives you about that service. So there are also examples of the firms which use innovation to move their goods from one SEC category to that of another. So we can give the best example of McDonald's. So the part of genius of McDonald's is how it made its restaurants into search goods or commodities. So they provide a predictable experience supported by the matrices to perpetuate that kind of uniformity all over. And also if you see in higher education, classic credence goods, there is a long standing current of that to provide training and certification which is almost measurable to the point of being a search good. That is to tell, maybe where did you do your project management training? So numerous online services nowadays also allow students to review their professors. So which could make higher education into something closer to an no experience good than the experience service as defined by customer satisfaction scores and also the reviews. So finally we can speak about the SEC analysis informs content marketing. I do hope that you know what this content marketing is. So, thinking about this SEC goods absolutely influenced by decision to make an index ranking digital experiences. Knowing that the products teams already valued external rankings, it makes sense to approach them with kind of expert analysis that aligns to credence purchase. So this kind of method, since it is rooted in economic theory, few customer experience professionals know about it or use into ground experience strategy. But then as they empathize with buyers, it is helpful to understand the level of information consumers have in a buying process can be determined by the type of goods, and that this particular thing creates recognizable dynamics which companies can address as they engage with buyers. So this is all about credence sorry, search service, experience service, and credence service. So next we have customer expectations of services. So what is this customer expectation? You know by definition and by meaning. That is, what is that customer wants when they buy a particular product or a service and they do pay for it. So, customer expectations, when we speak in terms of services, they are especially the beliefs about service delivery, that service as standards or a kind of a reference points against which performance of these services can be judged. So, it is always that customers they shall compare. So, because customers compare their perception of performance with these reference points when evaluating service quality through knowledge about customer expectations will also be equally important to service marketers. That is to tell, knowing what the customer expects is the first, not only it is the first, but it is also possibly most critical step in delivering quality services. Now, whichever organization which would be wrong about what customers want can always result themselves in losing a customer's business when another company hits the target exactly. So being wrong can also mean expending money, time, and other resources on things that do not count to the customer. So whichever organization which becomes wrong can even mean that they are unable to survive in a fierce competitive market. So, among all the different aspects of expectations that are necessarily to be explored, analyzed, and understood for successful service marketing, uh, can be known with the few questions. That is to tell, what types of expectations do customer hold about some kind of services? Normally, when we try to understand customer, we can answer this question better. For that, a continuous evaluation of the services would be very much necessary. Then comes the question as to what factors, most influence the formation of these different kinds of expectations that the consumers have. So next come the questions, what role do these, different factors play in changing expectations? Or how can a service company meet or exceed customer expectations? There we shall begin with service expectations. Now, in the beginning, we said that expectations are nothing but all those reference points or all those particular things against which this delivered service is compared. Now, this particular understanding that we have about the expectation, it is just the beginning of it. So, the level of expectations, it can vary widely depending upon the reference point the customer holds. That is to tell, although most, everyone has an intuitive sense of what expectations are. So service marketers, they need a far more thorough and clear definition of expectations to measure, to comprehend, to understand, and also to manage them. So now maybe with example you will understand this better. Now for an example, imagine that you are planning to go to a restaurant. Okay, that we shall consider that we want to go to a restaurant. Now look into the slide in particular. This particular picture that has been put up in the slide, now it displays a continuum of possible service expectations that an individual can get. So on the left of the continuum, there are different types or different levels of expectations, which is ranging from high, that is in the top of the continuum, to low in the bottom. So at each point they have given a name to the type of expectations, and also they have illustrated on the right side of the figure what it might mean in terms of restaurant that you are considering. But see, they have started with ideal expectations or the desires, which is very high. What could be the statement? Could it be like it could be like everyone says this restaurant is a good as one that would be there in France, and that I want to go somewhere very special for maybe for my specialty. Then comes the next, which is next top level expectation, that is normative. That is, there should be expectation which can be said in terms of as expensive as this restaurant is, it ought to have excellent food and services. Then comes the experience based norms or experience based expectations, where they would tell most times this restaurant is very good, but when it gets busy the services shall become slow. You might have experienced this in particular. Then comes the acceptable expectations. So here the quality they might be low, where they would tell I expect this restaurant to serve me in an adequate manner. To what price I give, I would want the services. Then lastly comes the minimum tolerable expectations, which tells I expect terrible service from this particular restaurant, but I came because the price here is low. But having seen this particular slide, note one thing, that how important the expectation depends upon how the individual want to evaluate, event makes an eventual assessment of the restaurant's performance. That is to tell, suppose if the individual went into a restaurant for which they hold the minimum tolerable expectations, paid very little money, and they were served immediately with good food. Alternatively, suppose that individual went to a restaurant for which they had the highest expectations or the ideal expectation according to this figure. They paid a lot of money and were served good but not fantastic food. So, which restaurant experience would judge to be best? So, the answer is likely to depend upon the reference point that the individual brought to their experience. Because the idea of customer expectation is so critical to evaluate of service that you'll have to know the types of expectations to know it better. So this particular picture, it has been taken from the ideas present by Architis in his book Expectations, Performance Evaluation and Consumers. Perception of Quality, that is Journal of Marketing, which was published in October 93, and it has been published in the pages 18 to 34, and it speaks about possible levels of customer expectations. So now this is just a part of service expectation. To know it better, we shall see types of expectations. Now, it is always this that the customer holds different types of expectations about the services that they have purchased. So the highest expectations, it can be termed as desired service. That one what I want. So here the level of service the customer hopes to receive is the wished for or what I actually wished for level of performance. So desired service, it is always a blend of what the customer believes it can be and what it wants it to be or what it should be. That is to tell a consumer who sign up for an online dating service maybe. This particular consumer, he expect to find compatible, maybe attractive or interesting people to date and maybe perhaps even someone to marry. So this expectation that the customer has, it always reflects the hopes and wishes of the consumers. And in a similar way, maybe you yourself are likely to engage the service of maybe your colleague's placement office when you are ready to graduate. So what would be your expectations of the service? So maybe in all likelihood you want the office to help find your job, maybe the right job in the right place for the right salary because that is what you hope and you wish for. But then, however, maybe you probably also see that there might be, economy may constrain the availability of maybe idle job openings in companies. And not that, all companies that you may be interested in have a relationship with the university placement office. So, in this situation, and in general, customers hope to achieve their service desires, but they recognize this is not always possible. So, this kind of, what we can call as the threshold level of acceptable service, it is being called as adequate service. Okay. One that is desired service, what you wish and what you want to be, and somewhere you understand that that may not be possible because of some of the constraint. Those are termed as adequate service. So adequate services, it can be the minimum level of service that the customers are ready to accept it. So sometimes maybe when there is a slowdown in economy, maybe many college graduates who have trained for high skilled jobs accept, maybe entry level position, maybe at fast food restaurant or internship for no pay. So their hopes and desires shall always be still high, but they recognize that they cannot attain those desires in the market that exists at the time. So their standard of adequate service from the placement office was much lower than their desired services. So some graduates, they accept any job for which they can earn a salary, and others, they might agree to non-paying or short-term position as interns to gain experience. So adequate services expectations represents, the minimum tolerable expectations, the one which you can see in the bottom level of performance that is acceptable to the customer. So what you can see over the slide is these two expectation standards as the upper and lower boundaries for customer expectation. So this particular picture that has been put up, it portrays the idea that, customers access service performance on the basis of two standard boundaries. That is what they desire and what they deem acceptable. So this is nothing but the dual customer expectation level. So next comes what we can call as the zone of tolerance. See this picture, this is types of expectations. At the highest you have those desired service, and in the bottom you have adequate service. So now we are speaking about the zone of tolerance, and that comes in between the two. That is the zone of tolerance. This is to tell because there is something that you have desired, then there is service that you are ready to accept. So the area between these two is nothing but zone of tolerance. That is simply to tell anything that travels, below the adequate services is not tolerated or is not acceptable by the consumer. So now, what happens with the service is the thing that one of the characteristics of service is that it is heterogeneous in nature. So that is to tell that its performance, it may vary across, providers. It may vary across employees, maybe from the same provider also, and even with the same service employee. That is to tell, best you might have experienced this in a beauty salon. So the extent to which customers recognize and are willing to accept this variation is nothing but what we term as the zone of tolerance. Now, if the service drops below this adequate service, the minimum level considered acceptable. So customers will be frustrated and most likely, dissatisfied with the company. So if services drops below adequate service, the minimum level considered acceptable. Sorry. So if the service performance is above the zone of tolerance or at the top end where performance exceeds the desired service, customers will be very pleased and probably quite surprised as well. So when you see this particular slide, you might be able to understand that the zone of tolerance as the range in which customers do not particularly note service performance. So when it falls outside the range, that is either very low or very high, the service gives the customer's attention in either a positive or negative way. So as an example, you can consider waiting in the line maybe to purchase movie tickets. So might not be in the recent 2 years, but before 2 years, before this pandemic hit the world, you might have experienced this. So most customers they hold a range of acceptable times for this service, uh, where they want to buy tickets. Probably somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. But then if waiting to purchase the tickets consumes, that period of time, then customers they probably do not pay much attention to the wait. So if a customer enters the line and finds a sufficient number of movie theater personnel to serve them in uh, or maybe serve them in first 2 or 3 minutes, they may notice the service and may judge it to be excellent. But along with this, on the other hand, if a customer, they had to wait for 15 minutes in the line, they may begin to grumble and look to their watch. So the more the weight falls below the zone of tolerance, the more frustrated the customer will be. So the customer service expectation it is always characterized by the range of levels which is bounded by desired and adequate service rather than a single level. So this tolerance zone which represents the difference between desired service and the level of service considered adequate, it can expand and it can also contract for one given customer. Now take an example of airline. So an airline customer's zone of tolerance will normally be narrow when they are running late and is concerned about making their plan. So a minute's delay for anything that occurs prior to boarding the plane might seem much longer and their adequate service level also increase. As against to this, there might be a customer who arrives at the airport early may have larger tolerance zone by making the wait in the line far less noticeable than when this particular customer was pressed for the time. So these example shows that the marketer must understand not just the size and boundary levels for the zone of tolerance, but also when and how the tolerance zone fluctuates for a given customer. Now, having spoken about customer expectation, the zone of tolerance, it comes down to this point that different customer they possess different zone of tolerance. So this is yet another aspect of variability, especially in the range of reasonable service. Um, it is to tell that different customer they possess different tolerance zone. So some customers they might have narrow zones of tolerance, maybe most of the times because what they consider to be minimally acceptable is greater, or requiring a smaller but higher range of service from providers. As against to this kind, there might be other customers who have a greater range of expectations of service. For example, very busy customers would likely, always be pressed for time. So desire short wait times in general, and they might hold a constrained range for the length of acceptable wait times. So when it comes to meeting, plumbers or maybe the appliance repairs personnel at their homes, customer who work outside the home, they have a more strict window of acceptable time tolerance for that appointment that can then be to those of customers who work in their homes or do not work at all. So you understand what I'm trying to tell. That is to tell, now consider two households and they are in necessary of some plumbing service. In house A, maybe everybody are working. So if they have to call plumbers, they'll have to call them at outside time of work, and also they'll have to say if the plumbers are available for the those particular time. So the time constraint is there. Their time that they'll have shall be very short. That is where we call it as to be pressed. But now, as against to this, consider house B, where there might be a person who works from home, or maybe they don't work at all. Now, if they have to call the plumbers, they can call them at any time when the plumbers would be ready. So that is how all this tolerance, zone of tolerance differs. Now, in the house A, at the scheduled time, if the plumber is unable to come, then their zone of tolerance would go below and below. But whereas in house B, maybe the tolerance level would be high. So, maybe in airline company also, they must fully understand customer views of, new service technologies maybe. This is all to tell, a customer's zone of tolerance, it increases or decreases depending on a number of factors, including company controlled factors such as price also. So when price increases, customers tend to be less tolerant if at all it is a poor service. Whereas in this case, the zone of tolerance decreases because the adequate service level shifts upward. So the fluctuation in a customer zone of tolerance, is more a function of changes in the adequate service level, which moves readily up and down because of situation circumstances, than in the desired service level, which tends to move upward incrementally because of accumulated experience. So desired service is relatively stable compared with adequate service, which moves up and down and in response to competition and other factors. So fluctuation in the zone of tolerance can be linked to an accordion's movement, but with most of the uh, gyration coming from one side, it is from the adequate service level rather than from the desired service level. So what you can see over the slide is that in the y-axis you have level of expectation, and in the x-axis you have two elements, that is reliability of the service and the empathy of the service. And you have the desired service, adequate service, and zone of service, at what level it shall be. Now this particular picture has been adopted from L. Barry and A. Parashuraman and V.S. Zatimal, 10 Lessons for Improving Service Quality, Marketing, which was published by Marketing Science Institute in their report number 93104, which was published in May 93. Excuse me. So next we have zone of tolerance. Uh, it varies for services. So So this dimension customers tolerance zone, they also vary with different service attributes or different service dimension, what we can tell. So the more important the factor, the narrower the zone of tolerance is likely to be. That is to tell, in general, customers are likely to be less tolerant about unreliable service, that is broken promises or service errors, than other service deficiency, which means that they have higher expectation for this factor. So in addition to higher expectations for the most important service dimension and attributes, customers they may relax their expectations for the less important factors, making the zone of tolerance for the most important service dimension smaller and smaller, and the desired and adequate service levels higher. So as you see in the slide, reliability they have considered to be most important, and empathy they have considered to be least important. So for today, if you have time and if you wish, see what these two words are. What does reliability means when it comes to marketing? What does empathy means when it comes to marketing? Don't go and try to find it for service, but in the beginning try to know it for marketing. What is reliability? What is empathy? So next we shall move on to factors that influence customer expectations of services. So what you can see over the slide is same thing that has been put up in the right hand side and left hand side. It is just to mention where it falls. So these are the factors that influence desired service. Uh, for adequate service, we shall see later on. For desired service, the factors that influence us are personal need, personal service philosophy, and derived service expectation. So each of this we shall see in detail. So the first one that we have is personal needs. So as you can see over the slide, there are three major influence on the desired service level. The first one is personal needs, and it represents those states or conditions which are essential to the physical or the psychological well-being of the customer, and also which are important factors that can shape what customer desires in service. So personal needs, it can fall into many categories, including psychological, social, physical, and functional. Let us consider a fan, not the ceiling fan, but a fan or an individual who regularly goes to maybe a baseball game right from work and is therefore thirsty and hungry, and he hopes and desires that the food and drink vendors will pass by the section in which he is eating frequently. But then let us also consider an individual or a fan who regularly has dinner elsewhere, who has a lower level of desired service from the vendors. So a customer with high social and dependency needs may have relatively high expectation for a hotel's ancillary service. Where he's hoping, for example, that the hotel has maybe has a bar with a live music and maybe even with dancing. So the effect of personal needs on the desired service can be said by different expectations that has been held by the customers. For to know this more, let us take an example of two business insurance customer, where we can know how there shall be effect of personal needs on desired service, or the different expectations that are held by two business insurance customers. The first one might tell, I expect that broker, that is an insurance. So I expect broker to do a great deal of my work because I do not have the staff. So I expect the broker to know a great deal about my business and communicate that knowledge to the underwriter. This might be what the first customer might be willing. As against to this, there might be that of another students, another customers, where he might tell, my expectations are different. I do have a staff to do our certificates and all other necessary work, and therefore I use the broker minimally. So now this example was said so that you are able to understand how the personal needs of each customer results in how much level of desired service that they are expecting. Whereas the first customer, because he had no idea of what is going on, he wanted the best of service. As against to the second customer who already had the services of others, but then he just wants the service of the insurance company. So as against this, we have personal service philosophy. Now this is a second influence on desired service expectation. That is personal service philosophy. So here the customer's underlying generic attitude about the meaning of service, highest expectation, and the proper conduct of the service providers are necessary. Now, for example, if at all hmm, a hotel management student, if they have been ever employed as a server in a very big restaurant, then they are likely to have standards for restaurant service that have been maybe shaped by their training and also by experience in their role. So they might, for example, believe that services should not keep customers waiting maybe longer than 15 minutes to take their orders. So knowing the way a kitchen operates, they may be less tolerant of maybe lukewarm food or errors in order than customers who have not held the role of server. That is to tell, in general, customers who are themselves in service business or have worked for them in the past seem to have especially strong service philosophy. That is to tell, maybe you yourself might own a cloth shop, and somewhere you might have been and you might be visiting a branded cloth shop. So now that you know how this particular thing works, if at all there is something that doesn't work according to you, you can easily point out it than those who have zero experience in the field. Or that is to tell, you would be having lesser zone of tolerance, especially for those services in which you yourself has a experience of. Then we have derived service expectation. So this is yet another influence on desired services. So at another influence on desired service expectation is the third one that we are considering, that is derived service expectation. See, do not get confused. For desired services, we have derived service expectations. So when is that this will occur? So this shall occur when customer expectations shall be derived by another person or group of people. For that example, consider a individual, maybe a niece, okay? She might be from a big family. Now, this particular girl or this niece She might be planning for the 90th birthday party of her favorite aunt. So here in this case, this niece, she is representing the entire family. Maybe in selecting a restaurant for a successful celebration. So her needs, it shall be driven in part by expectation that are derived from the other family member also. So we can take yet another example. A parent choosing a vacation for the family, or a spouse selecting home cleaning services, or maybe an employee choosing an office for the firm. So all these customer individual expectations, they are intensified because they represent and must answer to other parties who will receive the services also. So when we speak, oh, sorry, when we speak in context of business to business service, what happens is that customer expectations are normally driven by the expectations of their own customers. So the head of an information technology department, if we consider in an insurance company, uh, sorry, what was I telling? So yes, the we were speaking about the head of an information technology department. So if we consider this person in an insurance company, he shall be the person who is in the business uh, of customer of a large computer vendor. So he shall be having expectation, especially based on those of insurance customer that they serve. So when the computer equipment is down, their customers shall complain. So their need to keep the system up and running shall not just be her own desire, but then it is shall always be a desire driven from the pressure of their firm's custom. So this is some of the attributes uh, that influence customer expectations of service from desired service. So the next we have from the part of adequate service. There we have perceived service alternatives, we have situational factors, and then we have predicated services. So when we speak of predicated service, we'll have explicit service promise that we saw, implicit service promises or word of mouth communication, and past experience. See, it is a continuation of the drawing. First we spoke about zone of expectation, that is desired service and adequate service, and in between we had zone of tolerance. Then we are speaking of what are the factors which influence this desired services and adequate service. So when we tell desired service, we have three. That is personal needs we have personal service philosophy, when we have derived service expectation. So coming to adequate service, we have perceived service alternatives, we have situational factors and predicated service. When we speak about this predicated service, we have explicit service promises, implicit service promises, word of mouth communication, and past experience. So all of this we shall see in our coming class. because now that we have discussed so many things, it might be difficult for you all to comprehend everything. So for today, what you do is just go back and see what is the search, experience and credence property. What are three different things? Later on you try to know the what is customer expectation, and in that please try to know what is reliability and empathy.